thinking about designing, designing the future, and really how do we move forward as teacher educators into a world that is more connected, but also that we have so many more challenges ahead of us. So thinking about the technology, thinking about what we're doing at our own sites, and also what are some things that we want to share with each other, and more importantly, I think, what are the questions that we can ask one another? So maybe we could mobilize all the funds of knowledge that are represented in this hemisphere, and really in three continents. We have 3 continents represented here, 12 hours of time zone. So it's just wonderful to think what we might mobilize here.
So Victor, there is also one thing that I would like to add to the conversation, and that is around this idea of teacher supply. I would like to know how countries are meeting their needs for teachers. And in the United States, there are some areas that desperately need teachers, and then in other areas we have an oversupply. And this is an international question, and since we have an international group here conversing, if people could just at some point today just say if they're even worried about teacher supply, or how they address it or don't address it.
Okay, I'm gonna type and I'll mute when I'm typing so nobody gets all that clicking, but is everybody clear on the question that Rosalind has just asked? Yeah, does anybody want to jump in?
Well, I know in Canada there is a teacher shortage as well. The interesting thing is that we have clarified our provincial boundaries and certification, which has allowed graduates to move to different provinces more easily than before. And however, what we're finding is an aging teaching population as regarding mentorship teachers or teachers who have experience, which has been an interesting challenge here.
Anyone else want to talk about the issue of how do you, are you experiencing teacher shortages in your country? Are they in specific disciplines? Are there some strategies that are working? And in particular, how do you see ESD helping, or is it a challenge for ESD that there are teacher shortages?
I think she has a Pete may have a question.
Yes, I have a comment in relation to my country. The issue of teacher need, to me, in Nigeria, is not so much as that of quantity as of quality. Numbers are there, but most teachers are so qualitatively inadequate that, to me, the training becomes a critical issue. And this is where I think ESD, if embraced, can come to our help. A situation where the pupils being taught know more than the teachers who are teaching them, to me, leaves much to be desired, especially at the lower level of the education system, which is so critical. Reading, spelling, and all that. So the quality of teachers, to me, is a critical problem in Nigeria, not so much the quantity.
Yes, I would like to comment briefly about Sweden. In as far as the numbers are concerned, the situation seems to be okay in Sweden, but there is a slight shortage of teachers in the fields of maths and science. But one thing that is really critical now, due to the surge of mass migration into Western Europe, Sweden has taken quite a number of people who have migrated from Afghanistan, Syria, etc. They are quite many. And the policy here is that young people, when they're at school, they should learn in their mother tongue. And also when they get into the higher grades, they have to be integrated into the Swedish community and the Swedish school system. And the real challenge that we have is that we don't have teachers who have been trained to do that, because this has happened at a time where teachers have not had time to prepare for the large numbers of people who are coming in terms of migration. So that is one area that is really critical at the moment.
I am following up on what was said before from Sweden, because it's amazing that Jamaica, which is a developing country, suffers some of the same problems that was spoken of before, in that we have a supply problem of teachers for science and for mathematics as well. And we suffer not from the migration of people coming in, but from the migration of our math and science teachers leaving for the developed countries. As a matter of fact, we have US and UK administrators coming down to Jamaica and actually recruiting some of our graduates and some of our best brains in science and math education, you know, to go to the developed countries. And I'm afraid that, you know, some of our teachers, they want to, they want to move on in the world, both professionally and economically and so forth. And so they leave us. So we have that problem with math and science. We have an oversupply at the primary level, because interestingly, our population numbers of students are decreasing at the primaries, and we continued to train primary teachers, not only at the diploma level, but also at the bachelor's level, so that we have, to my knowledge, an oversupply of teachers at the primary level. Although we do suffer to some extent, of course, in the rural areas, because our teachers do not wish to, you know, go out there to teach. Now, how ESD can really help with this, I think we would have to really, as the working group in our School of Education, put our minds perhaps to some consideration around that. But I'm not sure that we have discussed it at that level yet.
I'm particularly interested in the challenge that you're describing with the US and Great Britain recruiting your teachers. That's the part of me thinks that it may be because in the US, I mean, I can talk a little bit about the US. Our challenge is that in poor communities, and particularly communities that serve high numbers of students of color, students in poverty, students who are learning English as their second or third language, those communities sometimes have difficulty recruiting teachers, partly because of the funding structure. There are differences in what teachers can get paid depending on which communities they're in. And it wouldn't surprise me, I'd love to see some data on this, if those communities are recruiting from Jamaica and elsewhere in the Caribbean because they understand that they need to have teachers of color, teachers who understand the context of their students, and they're not able to recruit teachers from the US because for a number of reasons, not the least of which is in many of our teacher ed programs, our teacher ed programs in the US are overwhelmingly white and female, and it's difficult to recruit even into our teacher ed program students of color. So I think what you're seeing globally is some of the impact of the systems of power and privilege and oppression that play in the US. We have systemic racism at play in the US. And the response may be that they're going to Jamaica and draining your brains. So there's a double-edged problem here going on. I mean, I'm speculating. I think we could find some data that'd be an interesting study to think about is where are those teachers going and why are they recruiting, particularly into the US?
We can't hear you.
I said it would be an interesting research area. Yeah.
And I'll just add to that, this is Michelle, just to say that even within the United States, there are people recruiting from, people coming from North Carolina going to Texas and recruiting whole groups of teachers to come and teach for them, or people, or vice versa, because they can pay more. And particular states are having particular issues paying teachers or funding and supporting classrooms and that sort of thing. And our city in Harrisonburg is extremely diverse for a city in the US in terms of being international. And I would agree that that I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're desperate to find people from other countries to become teachers here, because they need to find qualified teachers to work with the students from around the world. We have 50 different languages spoken in our public schools, and we're not a very big city. So trying to find people who are able to effectively teach very diverse populations is important. But at the same time, we have big teacher shortages, and just in brief, at the university, we have offered 5-year programs where as incentives for people who become teachers to finish with a master's degree so that they're paid a little more when they go out into the schools. But because of the teacher shortage, and I know there are many other reasons, we're now looking and moving to already 4-year programs to quickly and more quickly get people into the teaching profession. And if they would like to return to school for a graduate degree, great. But we are trying our best to make that switch in our college right now.
Yes. I should add that our government is doing something. They have offered numerous scholarships over the past 2 years to students who are interested in teacher education for math and for science. And this has been taken up by quite a number of young people. And I think it is up to the teacher education programs to really work through the value systems that they seek for the students to develop, so that they would find some love in, giving back to their countries, rather than migrating to the metropoles.
What I'm hearing is a systemic problem of a tired educational system that has always been short of teachers, or limited by their scope or their focus subject area or required area of study. And this begs the question whether or not this system, which is 2 centuries old, pretty much, is really a dying culture, if you will, and that we here today and through ESD and the network are really talking about our emergence of a different kind of education, which is oriented to particularly sustaining the well-being of all over the long term. And it seems to me, and I know Chuck and I have been talking about this in Canada, that the notion of reorienting education that focuses on preparing people with the skills and knowledge to sustain the well-being of all over the long term is actually the purpose of formal education. And if formal education isn't oriented that way, and I'm suggesting, with all due respect, that our old, tired education system did not do that, I'll go back. If education isn't oriented to sustaining the well-being of all over the long term, there is no point to it. And with that, I would also add that we've had these 2 centuries of learning, education, and we are in this particular situation. And I would suggest that it's maybe caused by this tired education system that we've been talking about. I'd love to hear a conversation that actually comes up with a strategy to change the position of education in society following the Bonn Declaration in 2009. And in our 2010 meetings in Paris, the notion was that universities are implicated in preparing the most important people on this planet. And I'm afraid in Canada, that message, that influence of change, I guess, is not happening. People are concerned or fear change. They are really wired around outcomes rather than, as I think I heard, the values and the rightness of where education should be going.
Garth, that was a really nice lead-in to tomorrow's keynote speaker, Dr. Chow. Tomorrow is going to be all asynchronous, so you can watch the keynote speaker. He talks about reimagining education to fit the new economic system. And I hope that there is lively discussion. If people would post afterwards, that would be a great place to bring up exactly what you said here.
Yes, Rosalind, I referred to him before coming on and whatever, and I think that this discussion we're having today could roll into what he is going to be saying and directing many of us to do. It's too bad that in Canada, for example, there isn't a collective voice across this country because our education system is provincial. The only province, I think, Rosalind, you know, is our province of Manitoba, which has an outcome of their education is in preparing people to live sustainably. Saskatchewan now has a framework for sustainability, and it'll be interesting to see how it parallels with the discussion tomorrow.
And also, so you all know, we're recording, so we should have an archive of what each of us are saying here too. So that'll we'll find out how to make that available afterwards.
I would like to comment on what Garth has just said. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
That's wonderful.
Yes, you see, I like it when you say the education system has become obsolete, or old and tired education system. But as a teacher educator, I would like to link that to teacher education itself, that we also have a problem in teacher education, that the people who are leading in our teacher education are also working or operating in the past. I have had the privilege of working with the professors. My job is working with people who are teaching teachers. And many times I hear that people, when they go to see their student teachers teach, they are not very happy because they say they are not teaching the way they trained them. And I always say it is not the students' problem, because the students have not been trained in the lecture room has not been operating in the way that you would like to see your students working in the classroom. And also, this is also linked to old and tired universities with old curricula, very rigid in changing. The bigger and the more prestigious the university is, the more difficult it is to adjust to the changing world so that we can teach in changing times. So I would like to link what you have just said when you say old and tired education system, and that also includes us. We often talk about professional development for teachers, but rarely do we talk about professional development for ourselves, these people who are teaching teachers. We forget that we are still teaching from yesterday, but we want our teachers to be teachers of tomorrow.
That is so true. And it's interesting. It's funny because I stepped away, retired, they say, from the Faculty of Education, but I'm still retrying. And I think you're right on, Shepard, with respect to the difficulty that teacher educators see in their own professional development. It's an infringement upon their academic freedom, possibly. It's also an infringement on their tried and true principles, which reflect to some degree an ego, which seems to dominate as opposed to being more principled in what they do. I talked about the gravity of the job teacher educators have. And at many times I question whether or not on principle and not on personalities, that faculties of education and their faculty really, truly do not understand the gravity of the job they have in preparing the most important people on this planet. And I know that discussion surfaced in 2010, and I'm glad it's still percolating, if you will.
I wonder if I might jump in briefly. As a teacher educator among a department that's really strong and forward thinking, we've been speaking this semester about creating agents of change in our teachers who then go out and are institutionally stifled at the schools that employ them. And so I'm struck listening to the multiplicity of comments from our participants, and this is a question as much as a statement. I feel as if there is a symphony here to be coordinated. We need to ask teacher educators to think forward. We must ask our teacher candidates, our university students, to be ready to be opened, but we must also ask our institutions and the communities that support those institutions in public schooling to be ready for change as well. And so it seems we have an initiative that has multiple fronts, no one of which can be pushed without the others being taken into account. Does this sound right? What is your feedback?
Well, I know
I have a comment to say about that, because in the work that I do, we have seen that sometimes you begin to come up with really good teachers going into the schools, and the schools are not ready, as we have said. So we have taken what we refer to as a systems approach, that you need the community, the schools, assessment, teacher training, Ministry of Higher Education, so that when change happens, it happens at the same time. If all those stakeholders are not addressed at the same time, then one wheel will come off, and our vehicle will not move.
When I arrived at the University of Regina in the late 70s, and this is in the province of Saskatchewan, which had a population of just 1 million people, all the partners of education literally worked together, gathered around the table to talk about what was the most important thing we should be doing in teacher education, curriculum delivery, and certification. It was a marvelous and unique situation where all of the partners, even the school trustees, even the ministries, all got together, and they engaged in common outcomes, like what is going to be the best for the fishbowl of Saskatchewan and their children. Over time, governments shifted to outcomes-based education, where outcomes became the most important and the learning, being honest, the most important learning became secondary. Our teachers now are pressed into a variety of different assessment tools and whatever. What's interesting and what's happening is that the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation, which is the union of teachers, is starting to move back to a more collegial educational conversation, and that people like myself and other teachers that have this same sense as we do today are bringing their voice and looking toward a new conversation. The Saskatchewan Teachers Federation has started reimagining education, giving directions to it. So to some degree, I'm hopeful, but what's very interesting is the orientation to required areas of study and how our students stack up with all the other provinces in this country and or other countries is still dominating. And I'm not suggesting that students shouldn't be able to demonstrate excellence in these areas. I'm saying that because they dominate in these areas, or this assessment does, it is actually depressing any kind of opportunity to think creatively and beyond what we've been up to.
All right, I'm going to step in just for a moment here. I want to make sure that we hear from all the voices that are here today. So what I'd like you to do is just think, we'll go a quick round and I can unmute you from my end. And so some of the folks that are online, we haven't had a chance to hear from. And I just want to know any thoughts that you have. We're halfway through this, this discussion period. So we'll just do a quick go round. And if you haven't introduced yourself also, we'll go ahead and we'll do that. And we'll start. Is it Ahmed that has your hand up? Is that right? So I have just initials on the, so I'm going to unmute you and you lower your hand, and why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay, do you hear me? Hi, yeah. Hi everybody.
Introduce yourself too.
Yes, my name is Ahmed Kaplan. I'm actually from the Middle East, but I just moved actually last year to Canada. So now I'm working actually with the University of Alberta, College Faculty of Education in the Center of Math, Science and Technology Education. So I teach here a course in, for primary education. And I work in the center as well for a project in preparing the training material for teachers. So my comment here actually is, why are we focusing only on preparing teachers formally to be teachers and address environmental issues and sustainability issues in their teaching? So what about the informal education sector? So there are actually a lot of activities that we can address and we can tackle actually in order to address the sustainability issues in our education. So this is an important actually area that we need to navigate. It's not actually wise to focus only on changing the outcomes, the already educational outcomes that we have, and convince all educational stakeholders to adopt the educational or sustainability perspective. But we can actually move around that and still put our pressures to advance or change the outcomes or align them to be sustainability actually education, but addressing at the same time the informal education arenas that can help us actually advance our perspective and advance our impact in our teachers and our students in the future.
So your idea is, one of the things you bring up is that we haven't mobilized non-formal and informal education as partners here. So great. I'm just going to do a quick go around. We can come back. We have a lot more time for discussion. I just want to make sure everybody has a chance. Carmel. Are you there, Carmel?
Yes, I am here. Hi.
Great. Do you have any comments you want to share at this point?
I think regarding teacher education and regarding teacher educators, I seem to be developing what I consider a pet peeve about teacher educators, because I think we have not emphasized enough the role of teacher educators and how we can reorient teacher educators towards teaching for sustainability. I think one of the things that we need to do is to look at some specific strategies that teacher educators can actually utilize as they design their curricula for, the various courses that they teach. One of the things I would really appreciate is looking specifically at the how-to. So when I'm preparing my teachers, or when I'm doing a session with teacher educators, what are some of the things to say to them and to provide to them for them to say, this is how you should go about doing it. When I explore the literature, there seems to be much talk about this reorientation of the curriculum, but in terms of specifically how to, I think we're lacking in that, and I think that is what could help us to make the shift that we really need.
All right, so wonderful. What you're suggesting is, and I think you're picking up on what Shepard was saying, is we really need to think about how are we retraining or reorienting teacher educators, and specifically what you're saying is we need more how-to, some specific strategies that people can implement. So it goes back to really the focus of the network is how do we support teacher educators to help them become reoriented towards education for sustainable development. And so I won't try to paraphrase everybody. I just want to make sure that we get everyone a chance to comment. Lorna, are you there?
I am. All right. I think one of the things that I have been noticing, I have been observing, is that there is a real challenge of ongoing support for teacher educators or for teachers. What happens is that we have a fantastic conference like this one and we get energized and motivated. And some of us go back and we manage to organize workshops for teachers or teacher educators. And then what happens is that they are simply then left for a while. And working recently with the Change From Within program at UWI, one of the things we noted was the request for teachers to change the way we do workshops. They actually want us to come into their schools and operate more as more like coaches or more like trainers. So one of the things we have tried is that when we have a workshop, we then have the teachers go back into their schools and modify and adjust to their particular environment. And a number of us go in and observe. And they found our coming in and giving them some feedback useful. But that unfortunately has been a one-off. Mm-hmm. And they have been asking for more of that kind of ongoing support, especially for an area like education for sustainable development, where there's so many different names and where in Jamaica, a lot of this exists on paper and not necessarily translated on the ground to real and practical things across the system. So that's the point I just wanted to raise.
Thank you. So maybe more hands-on in the room, in the classroom, direct support for teacher educators. Who is, I see just your login, MOUAL7IGD. I don't know who you are.
It's Rosalind.
Oh, it is you. I thought it might be. Okay, Rosalind. Okay. Do you want to comment, Rosalind?
Oh, thank you. There are always tensions in faculties of education. between being forward-looking in the Faculty of Education and then being rooted in the traditions of the local school district. If you get too far ahead, you're considered irrelevant, but you have to be careful that you don't just stay within the system. So I think there's this constant push-pull that we as teacher educators have to acknowledge. Lorna, Victor, and I were at the Kappa Delta Pi Convocation 2018 last week, along with Akpite and Uche. And what I noticed in a particular session is that some US-based teacher educators were giving me that look of, don't you remember I have to fulfill my state certification guidelines or mandates or standards for my teachers? And that is already packs the curriculum. How in the world could I put in some sustainability? And so within that reality, you know, then we begin to do tangible things like Project Y and Lorna's The 3 C's to show how you can weave sustainability into lessons that you already teach. But there is this feeling I find with working with teacher education institutions that everybody is teaching 3 and 4 courses a semester. They are maxed out, and they really are probably not taking time for their own professional development. In sort of, you know, like a College of Education strategic plan that Chris was talking about. So I think that's one of the realities that we are working with right now, at least in the United States. And that's one of the realities that I have to realize when I talk about putting more sustainability in the teacher education curriculum.
You know, you're really speaking to my reality when you say, talking about teaching a lot. One of the challenges we're having at my university is recruiting faculty, and particularly faculty who can work, as Michelle and I think it was Michelle and Christopher were saying, in communities of more diverse communities that really need much higher quality teachers. So it kind of goes back to the issue that I think might have been Uche was saying earlier, that the issue is quality, and that's part of our problem in teacher ed as well. As there are lots of people that can that we could get to come in and teach our teacher ed program. They're not all able to provide the kind of perspective and the kind of background that we want. So it is really that quality and quantity issue. So I just wanted to jump in there. Uche, do you want to comment next? Are you there, Uche? Uche, are you there? Okay. How about Therese? Oh, Uche,
I'm there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay.
Thank you for that introduction. I've always noted, and it's not just for Nigeria, I think it's in most countries, that the quality is lacking, quality more than quantity. And I would like to say that what Shepherd said and what Ahab, is it Ahab? What both of them said, I'd like to put together to address the SD concept and how to move on with achieving quality and sustainability in the long run. I like the observation Shepherd made because it applies to my country. The older teachers are not moving. They are not making any headway. They don't even want to learn. They are not even bothered. Now, how do they transfer the old skills to the new students? How do they learn? How do they move the students forward? We have to address that. Then I also take that of Ahab, talked about formal and informal education. Now, if I connect this two, hoping I'm doing the proper thing, I would like to ask us, how do we achieve sustainability in a most desirable manner if we don't establish a synergy between the formal, informal, and non-formal sectors of education? Because when we do this, the formal sector benefits, even with those older teachers, lecturers, professors of many years standing. You might be surprised to know. I'm not moving ahead, but we cannot afford to treat each of these sectors in isolation. We cannot just address formal education, teacher education, because teacher education also depends and should benefit from the informal and the non-formal education. I guess if we treat TVET separately from classroom teaching, the formal education separately, we are not going to get the quality we want. So it's always better, whatever we are doing, when we include the informal and the non-formal sectors in our formal system, and vice versa, take the formal education to the informal and non-formal, then we are getting there. We need each other in order to forge ahead and achieve that desired sustainability in our system. I don't see how we can be just hammering on teacher education. That's my stand. I may be wrong.
Thank you. That seems like a theme that's emerging from this conversation is we often think about whole school approaches, but really what we're now talking about are whole system approaches that really find ways to build synergies among non-formal, informal, TVET and teacher ed and our pre-K to 12 schools. Wonderful. Therese, would you like to comment?
Yes. Good afternoon again, everyone. And thank you for the discussion so far. So there are three things that I wanted to comment on. The first was one of the contributions from my colleague, Carmel, where she was speaking about the how-to. How do we do it? How do we integrate ESD into our teaching? And she expressed a need for more support for teacher educators and teachers in terms of that. I wanted to share, it's interesting, within the School of Education at our institution in Jamaica, we have this ESD working group, and one of the things that we tried to do was to have that very sort of session, a how-to session. How do we infuse ESD into our teaching? And in terms of the attendance for that session, I think there were maybe 7 or 8 persons present. And so that sort of raised the question for myself, as well as my colleague, Lorna, who was there with me. What is perhaps the obstacle, the stumbling block? Is it the language that we're using, ESD, education for sustainable development? Is it that persons maybe either don't understand the language or the terminology? Or is it that they're perhaps not seeing the relevancy to their teaching? And so perhaps that's something that we need to reconsider and to revisit, the language and the terminology, because we have offered that session and we intend to offer more. And so how do we bring in more staff members so that they can hopefully benefit from this? So that was my first comment. The second comment was, I think it was Shepard, if I'm not mistaken, who raised it. He said that we often speak about professional development for teachers, but what about professional development for ourselves? So obviously, I cannot speak about all teacher educators, but I will speak about a small pocket of teacher educators again, within our institution and within the ESD working group. And I think that there are members within that working group who do see the need and who do value professional development. One of the things, or some of the things that we're grappling with, how do we integrate ESD into our own teaching? You know, the concepts, the content, the methodologies, how do we model it in our own teaching? And so we have been working together collaboratively. We have attended workshops. We have attended online courses as a group. And so I'm just sharing that to just give perhaps a small pocket of hope that, you know, that professional development for ourselves as teacher educators, that there are some who do see the value in that. And then the third comment that I want to make, and it's really just, this is something that Rosalind started off the conversation with. She asked, you know, what can ESD offer to address the supply problem of teachers? And even as the conversation has been going throughout this online forum, that question has stuck with me. And so I don't have an answer, but it's something that I think I want to raise within the ambit of our ESD working group for us to think about and consider. What can education for sustainable development actually offer to this problem? So I want to thank her for raising that question, and it's sticking with me in the back of my mind, even as we go through. So those were my 3 comments, and I apologize for my voice. I'm battling a cold, so apologies if it hurt anyone's ears, the croakiness.
Thank you. You sounded fine. No, we didn't even notice. Wonderful, wonderful comments. Thank you. Okpete, do you want to comment? Are you there? Your screen might be frozen.
Thank you very much. I take the last speaker. I'm excited about her comment over the difficulty they experience with attracting people to accept ESD in the school. Innovations are usually resisted by people. And I think the way to go about such things is to, first of all, let people understand the concepts of the innovation, ESD, from the theoretical point of view first, before they can be expected to begin to put them into practice. ESD, we just say ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. But the various concepts associated with that total issue needs to be broken down for people to understand. And unless they understand and begin to buy into it, they will not see the need to make the effort. Innovations always call for change, and change is often not easy to accept by people. So I'm not surprised if the experience generally is that people are not buying into ESD. It is the strategy used in presenting it, and people must first of all be helped to understand the concept theoretically and buy into it before they can be expected to begin to practice it. That's one thing. Then the other thing about, we say, education for sustainable development, education for all. Now, there are large bodies of traditional wisdom and knowledge outside the formal education system. If ESD, as we intended, is for all, then we must incorporate traditional knowledge. I know the issue of language is one, local traditional languages. In my country, where a foreign language is used in the formal education system, people are fleeing the local language and, in fact, refusing to use it in their homes, and thereby causing a loss in human knowledge. ESD presents to me an opportunity for people to key into such things as local language, embodied in the curriculum of the formal school, not just as a subject to teach, but as something to use. Yes, parents resent it, but then if we go the extra mile of explaining that in learning a local language, for instance, we are not only learning language, we're all learning a whole way of looking at life, that if the language is allowed to be lost, will be lost to humanity as a whole. The point I'm really making is that ESD, to be whole, cannot afford to leave out the non-formal, informal wisdom that's embodied in traditional cultures and languages. The school curriculum, the education system as it functions today, does not give much attention to that. But if ESD is education for sustainability for all, we must make a change in the direction of incorporating traditional knowledge, traditional wisdom within the school system in the context of ESD. That is what I am suggesting.
Thank you. You know, that notion of bringing in traditional knowledge, and Eduardo is not on our call, but he does work in Guatemala with bringing indigenous knowledge into the university. And we were hoping to get a video from him, but I don't know if he's going to be able to do that for us. In the session that you'll see in my video later this week and in the panel, I often have been talking lately about culturally sustaining pedagogy. And that comes from the work of an individual named Django Paris. And I would be happy to send a reference. I'll put it up in the chat here. But that theme is really emerging. And Ahmed, you brought that up, and a number of us here have talked about this idea of non-formal, informal, and really thinking, I love the way, Ahmed, that you just brought us to this larger notion of how do we bring in indigenous, traditional, community knowledge, those funds of knowledge that are not present in our formal education systems. It's really a thank you for bringing that up, Ahmed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it my turn now? Okay.
Did you just raise your hand?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Thank you. Well, actually, I wanted actually to comment on the question raised by Rose. Actually, what can ESD contribute to the teacher shortage problem that we are facing? Actually, in my perspective, that creating or infusing or integrating education for sustainable development principles in programs like STEM, which I believe in, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, would actually contribute to solve the problem shortage, especially in science, math, and vocational and technology-related teaching professions. So this is actually a virgin field that we can think about, at least for now, because STEM is booming and is being adopted actually by several people and several education systems. And I think, it's widespread here in the States and in Canada as well, in a different name, and in the Middle East as well, the region where I come from. And it's actually making a huge difference actually in students' perspectives and students and teachers as well. So I think, we need to do some more work on how to reorient actually a STEM program for actually it's already oriented. It's already actually education for sustainable development principles are already infused in STEM, because when you're designing a solution for a problem, you are thinking about the environment and the environmental resources and how to recycle and how to think about it. So it's already there, but we need actually to direct it more and to encourage more people actually to adopt this system and do more to integrate education for sustainable development principles in STEM. So this is actually one way how to solve teacher shortage problem in the region. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Ahmed. So, and Garth and Christopher and Theresa, you've joined us. We've been just doing a quick go round on some comments from the first half of the discussion, and really thinking about, as Shepard had said, and Garth was talking about that we have obsolete and tired systems in play, and at the same time, there's a real need in many places for teachers and teacher shortages. So I don't know if you've been able to, maybe you can introduce yourself and anything you want to add from your perspective. And then everyone, I'd like to just then for the last half hour, open it back up to a general discussion. And Garth and Christopher, you had commented earlier, and if you want to jump in as well, that'd be great. And Shepard, so we'll just have a more general conversation here. But Therese, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and jump in.
Hi, I'm Theresa Harris, and I am at James Madison University. Hello, everybody, with Chris Wiley. My area is early and elementary education, so I work in the preparation of teachers PK all the way through grade 6. And I really appreciated this last little piece that Garth posted in the chat. It really kind of helped to catch me up, but I think it's really where we live at our institution on multiple levels, and in the College of Education in particular. A lot of our work seems to really be focused around what are those values and beliefs and dispositions within the individual that drive that person towards doing the very things that you all have been talking about since I've had a chance to join you. And that's not part of our tradition in the past. And so in looking at what Garth is writing about a real transformational purpose that really gets starting with the individual and what's inside that person, how do you bring that forward so that you actually care about these issues enough to act in the particular world and in the particular classrooms and with the particular stakeholders. I think we're there, and I think that's the exciting thing about this conference at this point in time, is hearing from multiple voices about, so how do we really do that? I think it's more than just doing lectures. I think it's more than going out and doing service projects or traveling here and there and everywhere. I think that theory is a really important part, but there's got to be a something, and I'm not sure I know exactly what that something is that's going to take us to the next step. So I figure if I listen long enough, somebody's going to come up with that. So I'll shut up now and do some more listening to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. And Garth, I was
Yes.
just reading what you wrote in the chat box as well. It's really wonderful contribution. Thanks. So so Garth, Christopher, you haven't had a chance to speak in our go round here. Anyone else? Shepard, I don't think we'll come back to you. So how about if we just open it up for about the last, we've got about 15 to 20 more minutes, and we just gonna have a more free-flowing discussion again.
I'd just like to respond just by saying that there is a synergy, there is an excitement, there is a need. Christoph, you talked about that within your own institution and getting the students engaged. Our faculty is full of fear of change, fear of not meeting expectations that traditional universities are suggesting they meet. We need, as Margaret Lee would say, we need warriors, and we need them now. We need to bring the world community of teacher educators together and come up with a noble strategy to engage governments, universities, teacher educators, of course, and also teachers and parents, not to make it so unmanageable, but to say, we're beyond the point of waiting, and we have to move. And what an exciting time this is. And I truly believe that it is exciting, and the opportunities are immense. Our city of Regina just approved that it will be using sustainable energy in the next 2030 and absolutely becoming an environment that is all about sustaining the well-being of all over the long term. From my position, and I'll be quiet after this, I don't know whether, and I heard this, that how do we infuse ESD? Well, I don't know if we can. All I do know is education has to be all about sustaining the well-being of all over the long term. The debate then becomes, or the discussion, what do we mean by well-being and what do we mean by all? And how can we get ourselves and others to become more interdisciplinary thinkers, not specialists, but be able to take on and understand how all these required areas of study or disciplines come together and allow us to come up with experiences for children and ourselves for that matter that give us the energy, the direction to sustain the well-being of all over the long term. It's a no-brainer. And I don't think it can be refuted.
Thank you, Garth. Really well spoken.
If I may come in here, can I? This is Marceline. I hear the
Yes,
passion.
yes. Yes,
I
please.
hear the passion in the last two speakers, coming from two different perspectives. The perspective of Therese is from the individual perspective. What moves somebody to have a passion and a moral purpose to work in education for the well-being of all? What brought us as individuals to have such a passion to work for ESD? If we cannot break that cycle that educators are in to find their own inner passion, then we will not be doing our work. I hope you're hearing me. I cannot go to teachers and say, come to a workshop on ESD. It has not been working for us. But yet when we go to teachers and ask them, what is the major issue you are battling with now in your life or in your school? And if they say to us, it's water or it's violence, and this is what has us frightened and so forth, then we can see them listening and thinking about how to solve that particular issue of violence that they themselves are feeling, or of not having water and living in drought, or of having to live with fires and so forth and so on. What I'm saying is that individuals need to be brought into ESD through the things that they feel passionate about, and not from some theoretical perspective of what we have been thinking ESD is over all this time. In trying to understand the problem they are feeling, it is then that we will have to work with them in understanding the environmental, economic, and societal problems that have brought each and every one of us to face the problem that we have at hand, and to therefore try to find the solution around it. And this has to be an individual moral issue that we are dealing with. And this is what we are weak on. As educators, we are weak on teaching for beliefs and values and having people move with actions. I'm passionate about this. Yes.
As you say, we need passion. We need
Yes.
to find out what people are passionate about. That's wonderful.
I think we're beyond passion and we become totally engaged, and as Marcella said, it is how we're touched by education that makes the difference.
Yes, yes.
Victor, can I ask a question?
Please do, yes.
As I keep understanding or as I am beginning to have a deeper understanding of sustainability and ESD, my mind tells me that we seem to be having a narrow view of this concept. I don't know, I may be wrong. My mind tells me that we need to expand this concept from us and the teacher and the students. And thinking about it now, I just asked myself, and I didn't get the answer, and I said I'll ask the question. Can anybody tell me what is teacher education? What does that mean, teacher education? Because if we look at it and see what teacher education means, would it mean confining it in the four walls of the classroom? I just need a good concept, a good definition of the concept, please, if anybody can do that.
Yeah, it's not a very easy question, but in a nutshell, I should say when I look at teacher education, I am looking at all peoples who are engaged with other people in terms of facilitating teaching and learning. If learning is going to take place, all people who are involved there, I would call them teachers, and each person who is involved in training people who will train others, who will work with others, I would refer to them as teacher educators, informal and non-formal. When in education for sustainable development, this includes a wide range of people. You've got people working in gender, you've got people working in migration, people working in civic things, etc. That's on the non-formal side. And then schools and colleges are only one place where education takes place. So
exactly.
Schools and colleges, one place, and all the other places where education takes place. So people who are dealing with that, I would say that's teacher education.
Can I follow up question again so you can continue? Now, with this concept definition, the wider definition, would we really want to see sustainability arising from training teachers, since we now recognize that there are teachers in those other areas of education, in those communities, in those traditional settings? There are teachers. They may not be in the four walls. And who says, anyway, that you're only a teacher when you are in the four walls? Do those teachers need training and retraining? My question. And if so, how?
So, Uche, one thing I learned, this is Rosalind, the one thing I learned about teacher education from working at UNESCO is there are as many ways to do teacher education as there are countries that are members of UNESCO, and that's like around 194. And so, in some places, universities decide what teacher education is, or the schools that are teacher colleges, the diploma places define what teacher education is, and that's fine. And then other places, like in the state of Tennessee, they have this whole list of things that teacher education is, and teacher educators and faculties of education have to guarantee to the state of Tennessee that they have met those criteria, so those people can then become certified within the state. So, I think definitions of teacher education really have to be locally defined rather than coming up with an international standard.
Whoa.
Okay. Okay. I wouldn't think so if you ask me, but it's okay.
But I also want to say that I think that the skills that non-formal educators get are different than the skills that formal educators who are in charge of classrooms learn. And someone put on the chat comments that every type of educator needs professional development that meets their needs. And I really agreed with whoever put that chat in.
Okay, but we should aim also at targeting the skills development in those other areas. Every skill area is important to sustainability, I think.
It's implicit that we help people understand the skills and the knowledge, give them the skills and the knowledge. The skills, it's implicit and understandable that the children need to read, write, have numeracy, all of the fundamental basic skills to learn. The question then becomes, what are they learning? And so that is really my focus. We are learning to help the world sustain itself, make it better. We know that when we engage children in things that make things better, they feel better about themselves. We're doing international research. Chuck is leading it on Indigenous youth and the whole notion of best practice related to ESD. And those are the things. And I go back to the idea of passion. Yeah, we're about that. On Rosalind's point, I agree that every place on this planet is unique, and they wrestle with their own ways of doing things. Totally get it. That is important and has to be supported. I think it can be helped by having an international orientation that they can reflect upon, and meaning that maybe over the long term, others will be really engaged in sustaining the well-being of all. We've used the fishbowl effect. What we're trying to do in Saskatchewan is to sustain the well-being of all over the long term. And people can look into our fishbowl from any place on the planet and see how we're progressing. I would hope that there would be multiple fishbowls around this planet doing the same sort of thing, because it makes no sense not to work towards sustaining the well-being of all. And if that's the case, looking at all of the things that are going on the planet, hey, that might give us a better idea of what we can do here.
Great. Thank you, Garth. I'm going to cut in here because we've got just about a minute left. And I just want to see if we can, I want to advocate a couple of things. I won't try to summarize. There were a number of points that were brought up. We do have opportunities for people to continue the conversation by posting. The contact information is available for everyone, so I'd really encourage us to continue these conversations. I think that the big idea that I was hearing come out in a couple of places is this idea of what do we think is the content of education and what do we want teacher educators to be doing? How do we incorporate other non-formal, informal, community-based sources, funds of knowledge, and really how can we continue this idea of creating a safe and just space for all forever around the planet. So any final thoughts anyone wants to share before we end this session?
Can I offer a call? Earlier today, I tried to get participants in the prior time zone meetings to post their thoughts and reflections for the remainder of the participants at the conference. I don't know if you, Victor, are planning on posting the ideas you just articulated for the broader conference attendance, but if not, I would encourage participants within this particular discussion to hop on the board and reflect so that the other time zones might hear our thoughts and build on them in the future. Is that appropriate?
Very, very appropriate. And the hallway conversations are one way to do that. We have posting. I've been trying to keep notes. I'm not good at moderating and keeping notes at the same time, so I don't know that I've caught all the thoughts.
I've taken a lot of notes.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I should
Yeah.
have known you would. You're always so good at that. Thank
I
you.
think I got everything.
Perfect. Okay. Well, then
But
why
if
don't
not,
Michelle and I will put our heads together. I'll send you my notes, Michelle, and then we can have a document. And Rosalind, what's the best way for us to post the findings from this discussion, the results of this discussion?
Okay, so there is a specific place on Course Networking to post the discussions from today's, the summaries from today's discussion. You send those to Andrew, and then Andrew will send them to Matt. And that way all four will go in at the same time, and then Matt will be able to put them up, and 24 hours from now they should, or maybe 26 hours from now, they should all be up on Course Networking.
Well, okay, so Michelle, I'll send you my notes, and then how about if you, since I'm guessing you have more comprehensive notes than I do. And then really quickly then, Christopher's suggestion about posting, we have multiple places for people to post. What would you suggest, Rosalind?
Oh, well, I would really like you to go in and make comments on the hallway conversations, and then around the videos, you can also just globally post to Course Networking. You can go into the specific sessions and post, and then I encourage you to use the chat function. If you want to talk with somebody, you go to their personal profile, and then there are two bubbles, conversation bubbles, and you can link to them for a chat or invite them for a chat. If those bubbles are green, that means they're online, and if they are gray, that means that they're offline. So I would encourage you, all of you, to when you're online, to go to your personal profile and turn your chat bubbles to green so that people can contact you. Also, you have one another's WhatsApp and Skype addresses. So contact one another that way too.
Perfect, thank you. This has been really a delightful and I think really productive time zone discussion. I'm really excited about the process and just this conversation. So thank everyone for joining and for participating. And I just hope that everyone enjoys the rest of the conference. It's really exciting to see everyone joining in and really doing stuff. Lorna.
Right.
Thanks, Victor.
Victor, the next session that we have as a regional chat, could you help us with the time there?
Yes.
Okay.
That will be, I will go to, it will be, for those of us in the Western Hemisphere, it'll be on Eastern Standard Time. So it's the 3 hours earlier than now. So this one was in Pacific time. That one will be on Eastern time. So the same time as New York City is what time that one will be. So thank you, Lauren. And we'll make sure that we get that information out. We know that there has been confusion about time zones, but this is the only one in Pacific time. All the rest for our hemisphere will be on Eastern time. So the expert and also the next time zone discussion.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you.
And we'll make sure we get that time out. Okay. All right, any other final thoughts from anyone?
Great job.
Hey, thank you all. It's been really just delightful to think that we can do this.
Thank you, Victor.
Thanks, Victor.
Bye, everyone. See you.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.